The laugh didn't shock me. What shocked me was how familiar it sounded. If you've ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to celebrate you, subscribe now. Some stories don't begin with love. They begin with clarity. The backyard looked perfect in the way photos always lie. String lights hung in soft arcs above the patio, glowing like someone had carefully designed warmth. Folding chairs were arranged in loose circles. The smell of barbecue clung to the warm evening air, thick and sweet. From the outside, it looked like a family that knew how to show up for each other. I stood near the table with a paper plate in my hand, watching everyone else exist so comfortably inside a moment that was supposed to be mine, my graduation. 4 years of scraped-together tuition, night shifts, shared apartments, silent panic attacks in library bathrooms, where I pressed my forehead against cold tile and told myself to breathe. None of that was visible here. None of it ever was. My mother, Karen, moved through the yard like a practiced hostess, laughing at jokes she'd heard 100 times before. She hugged people tightly, loudly telling them how proud she was of the kids. Plural, safe, non-specific. My sister Brooke sat at the center of everything, radiant in a new dress, one hand resting possessively on her son's shoulder. Tyler was 10 and already knew how to perform. He soaked up attention the way some people soak up sunlight, instinctively. Someone asked Brooke about her new car. Another asked about her upcoming vacation. My mother chimed in, nodding, adding details, shaping the narrative like she always did. No one asked about my degree. No one asked what I studied, or where I was headed next, or how I felt standing at the edge of adulthood with equal parts hope and terror twisting in my chest. On the far end of the table sat the cake, white frosting, blue lettering. "Congratulations, Emma." It was placed beside disposable cups and half-empty soda bottles, bumped every time someone reached for napkins. I kept glancing at it, not because I wanted attention, but because it felt like a mirror, present, decorated, easy to overlook. I told myself not to read into it. I had done that my whole life. Being low maintenance had become my role early, the child who didn't need reassurance, the daughter who didn't cause scenes, the sister who understood. A breeze moved through the yard, swaying the lights. For a brief, foolish second, I thought maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe someone would clap their hands and call everyone over. Maybe my mother would say my name clearly, proudly, without attaching it to someone else. Instead, Tyler ran toward the table. "Aunt Emma," he said loudly, eyes bright with mischief. "Mom said you only went to college so you could brag." The laughter came fast. Too fast. Adult laughter, comfortable laughter, the kind that assumes consent. My mother laughed first. Sharp, loud, unrestrained. Brooke lifted her glass, pretending to hide her smile behind it. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't speak. I never spoke in these moments. I had learned early that reacting made things worse. Reacting made me dramatic, sensitive, difficult. Tyler's hand shoved the cake. The plate slid, tilted, fell. Porcelain shattered against stone. Frosting exploded outward, white and blue streaking across the patio, onto my shoes, under people's feet. Someone gasped. Then someone laughed again. "Eat it off the ground," Tyler said, grinning. "It's still good," the laughter roared. I stood frozen, the plastic knife still in my hand, my fingers numb around it. No one corrected him. No one told him to apologize. My father didn't even look up from his phone. My mother's voice floated through it all, light and amused. "Oh, Emma, don't be so sensitive." Something inside me went very still. I set the knife down carefully, untied the apron I'd been handed earlier without asking for it. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look at anyone twice. As I walked across the deck, every step sounded too loud, like the wood itself was aware of what I was leaving behind. Their laughter followed me, fading only when the door closed. Outside, the air was cooler, the sky bruised with evening. I got into my car and drove away. I didn't cry. For the first time in my life, I understood that love wasn't supposed to sound like that, and that once you hear the truth clearly, you can't unhear it. I drove for almost 2 hours without realizing it. The highway stretched out in front of me, dark and empty, the white lane markers flashing beneath my headlights like a countdown I hadn't agreed to start. The radio stayed off. I needed the silence, not the kind that presses in on you, but the kind that lets your thoughts finally speak without interruption. My hand stayed tight on the steering wheel long after my shoulders started to ache. I kept replaying the sound of laughter in my head. Not Tyler's. The adults. The people who were supposed to know better. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, it was close to midnight. The building lights hummed softly, familiar and indifferent. I climbed the stairs slowly, unlocked my door, and stepped into a space that was entirely mine. No commentary, no expectations. I kicked off my shoes and stood there, breathing. That's when my phone buzzed. Mom. For a brief, irrational second, I thought maybe she'd apologize. Maybe the quiet after I left had unsettled her. Maybe she'd realized something had gone too far. The message was short. We've decided to cut contact for now. This behavior isn't healthy. Please don't reach out. A few seconds later, a reaction appeared underneath it. Brooke liked this message. I stared at the screen, waiting for the familiar ache to bloom in my chest, waiting for panic, shame, the instinct to fix things. Nothing came. Instead, a strange numbness spread through me, like my body had finally decided it was done, trying to protect me from the truth. I set the phone face down on the counter and sat on the edge of the couch. Cut contact. They said it like they were the ones walking away from something powerful. I laughed once, softly, at the ceiling. They had no idea what they were severing. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept drifting, not to the humiliation, but to memories that suddenly rearranged themselves under a new light. The times my mother praised my independence, the way my sister always seemed relieved when I stepped in, the subtle, constant assumption that I would handle things. By morning, exhaustion had burned itself out, leaving behind something sharper. The spreadsheet had always been there. I opened it every month, updated the numbers, balanced things out, told myself it was temporary. That morning, I really looked at it. 3 automatic withdrawals, 3 responsibilities I'd never advertised. My name sat quietly next to accounts that didn't belong to me, like a signature written in invisible ink. I remembered the first time my mother asked. "Just co-sign," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "You're not paying for anything. It's just a formality." Then my sister's car. Then my father's credit line. Each time, I told myself it was what family did. That being reliable meant being useful. That love was measured in what you were willing to absorb. Now, sitting alone in my kitchen, coffee untouched, I finally allowed myself to ask the question I'd avoided for years. What if I stopped? The idea felt almost dangerous, like stepping off a ledge you've been warned about your whole life. My stomach tightened. Old guilt surfaced automatically, rehearsed and ready. They need you. Don't be selfish. You're strong. You can handle it. I closed my eyes and let the thoughts pass without answering them. By noon, I was downtown, sitting across from a financial advisor whose name tag read Daniel. He listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't cry. I told the story the way it was. Quiet, long-term, normalized exploitation. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. "You're not the first person to confuse responsibility with obligation," he said gently. The paperwork took time. Verification, calls, confirmations. Each signature felt heavy and relieving at the same time, like setting down a weight you didn't realize had warped your posture. When it was done, Daniel slid the final document toward me. "You're free of liability," he said, "effective immediately." I walked outside into the cold air and realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, from release. The first call came at 7:14 a.m. I didn't answer it. I was standing in my kitchen, watching the kettle steam, feeling oddly grounded for someone whose phone had begun vibrating like it was trying to escape the counter. By the time I poured my coffee, there were 6 missed calls, all from my mother. At 7:22, my sister called. At 7:26, my father. At 7:31, an unfamiliar number from my hometown. I muted the phone and sat at the table, wrapping my hands around the mug. Outside, Seattle moved the way it always did. Cars passed. Someone jogged by with earbuds in. A woman walked her dog, laughing into her phone. The world hadn't noticed the small collapse happening inside my family. When I finally checked my messages, the tone had already shifted. "What did you do? Call me now. This is serious. You had no right." There it was, Not confusion, not concern. Accusation. By noon, the messages turned frantic. My mother left a voicemail, her voice brittle and sharp, the warmth completely gone. "Emma, this isn't funny. The bank called. Our account is restricted. You need to fix this immediately. Fix this." As if I'd broken something that belonged to them. I went to work that day. I answered emails. I sat through meetings. I nodded at the right moments. No one there knew my phone was lighting up every few minutes with panic and rage from people who had never asked how I was doing when everything worked in their favor. At 3:18 p.m., my sister texted. My car payment bounced. "Do you understand what you've done?" I stared at the message for a long time. Yes, I thought. For the first time, I really do. I didn't reply. That night, there was a knock on my door, not polite, not tentative, angry, repeated. The kind that assumes compliance. My chest tightened as I looked through the peephole. My mother stood there, arms crossed. My sister paced beside her, face flushed, eyes wild. They hadn't called ahead. They hadn't asked. They had come to collect. I didn't open the door. "Emma," my mother called sharply, like I was 12 again. "Open this door right now." My sister slammed her hand against the wood. "You ruined us. Do you hear me? Ruined." I leaned my forehead against the door, breathing slowly. The old instinct screamed at me to fix it, to explain, to smooth things over. Instead, I stepped back and dialed. When the police arrived, the hallway filled with red and blue light. My mother's voice rose instantly, emotional and performative. "She's our daughter," she cried. "She's being cruel." The officer's response was calm, neutral, devastating. "She's an adult. She's asked you to leave." From behind the door, I felt something unlock inside me. For the first time, the boundary wasn't mine alone. It was enforced. As they were escorted away, my mother turned back once, her eyes burning with betrayal. "You'll regret this," she said. I closed my eyes. "No, I already don't." The public story came next. I knew it would. My mother had always cared more about perception than truth. Silence made her uncomfortable. Control slipping made her dangerous. The Facebook post appeared 2 days later. "Sometimes the child you sacrifice for betrays you the hardest." We're devastated. Comments poured in. Old neighbors, distant relatives, people who remembered me as quiet, polite, easy. So sad. Ungrateful children are the worst. After all you did for her. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. A year ago, this would have shattered me. I would have typed paragraphs, screenshots, explanations no one asked for. Instead, I closed the app. At work, I sent one measured email to HR. At the bank, I requested documentation. I saved everything. I said nothing publicly. The truth doesn't argue. It waits. A week later, an envelope arrived. Official letterhead, clean language, liability removed, account separated, no further obligation. I held the paper in my hands longer than necessary, feeling the weight of it settle. Not triumph. Closure. That night, the post disappeared. I didn't celebrate. I didn't reach out. Some endings don't need witnesses. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, the way peace usually does when you're not chasing it. At first, I kept waiting for the next explosion. Another call, another accusation, another attempt to pull me back into a role I'd played for so long that it had felt permanent. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. At night, I started sleeping through until morning. No jolting awake with my heart racing. No half-dreams where I was standing in that backyard again, frosting on the ground, laughter ringing in my ears. My body, it turned out, had been bracing for years. Once the threat disappeared, it finally let go. My life became smaller in the best way. Work settled into a rhythm. I stopped apologizing before speaking. I noticed how often I'd use phrases like, "sorry to bother you," or "it's no big deal," when asking for things I'd earned. Slowly, those words faded from my vocabulary. One afternoon, my manager called me into her office. I assumed it was about a deadline or a revision. Instead, she smiled and said, "You've been steady. People rely on you. I wanted to acknowledge that." Steady. The word stayed with me all day. No one had ever praised me without attaching a condition to it. No one had ever framed my reliability as a strength instead of an obligation. At home, I began rebuilding my space the way I wanted. I donated furniture that reminded me of survival instead of comfort. I bought a plant and kept it alive. I cooked meals slowly, without the background noise of guilt. Friends noticed the change before I did. "You seem lighter," one of them said over coffee. I thought about it, then nodded. "I am." Months passed. The city shifted from gray to green. Summer settled in. My phone stayed quiet. No late-night messages, no vague threats. Then, one evening, a message appeared from a number I hadn't saved. "I'm sorry for everything. I shouldn't have let it go that far." It was my sister. No excuses, no requests, just words. I stared at the screen for a long time. The old version of me would have replied immediately, would have softened the moment, reassured her, tried to rebuild something fragile and uneven. Instead, I placed the phone face down. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes it means accepting the apology quietly and choosing not to step back into the fire. A year after the night I left that backyard, I walked across a small footbridge near my apartment. The water below reflected the sky, calm and unbothered. I stopped halfway and rested my hands on the railing. For so long, I'd believed strength meant endurance, that love meant staying, that being chosen required proving I was useful. I know better now. Strength is leaving when laughter turns cruel. Love doesn't demand erasure, and belonging starts with choosing yourself. I didn't win anything by walking away. I reclaimed it. And for the first time in my life, the quiet around me didn't feel empty. It felt like home.